So last week, especially after we finished recording, we were talking a little bit about how The Honeymooners was surprisingly kind of schlocky and lame, yeah.
Flat.
But then we started thinking about, like, maybe this is, you know, that's getting a little ways into the 50s. Things are getting kind of established, like, maybe this is what we're supposed to expect out of sitcoms in particular, because I haven't seen many 60s sitcoms, but I've seen a lot of 70s and 80s ones, and they're all like that. They're all schmaltzy and lame. And then we were talking amongst ourselves about, like, that's one reason why The Simpsons and especially Seinfeld were this, like, meteor strike that hit the earth, because it's like, wow, finally these families and people can be sarcastic and can have some edge and aren't just soft and lame.
See, the first of those, though, would have been Archie Bunker in the 70s.
Right.
Which was a real eye-opener because, again, most of them were real happy days kind of stuff, right? And here was this one where you had this very aggressive type male character who a lot of people were so opposed to him, such a redneck character. But that was probably one of the first that was really kind of out there, and then those others followed.
Yeah, because I guess also there would be like Married with Children was obviously.
Yes,
and,
Married with Children was another one.
And even, like, I guess Roseanne is a little more, at least, realistic.
Roseanne
if not
was
funny.
Later, though.
Right.
Roseanne was like 80s.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, you because it was a new venue, you were trying to get advertisers to support this thing. You probably couldn't just say anything you wanted and hope to get away with it because the public just wasn't in for that, and the advertisers were not the public. The public probably would have bought it, but the advertisers wouldn't.
Yeah, everyone just watched the Dumont network crash and burn. So it's like, let's not mess with things. So yeah, we were saying maybe, you know, our expectations for sitcoms are a little too lofty. Like, maybe we should be used to this Leave It to Beaver type bullshit. But then we were saying, like, you know, we always say that, like, Leave It to Beaver is the go-to show when you think of lame, toothless, soft sitcoms. But maybe we should watch Leave It to Beaver and see if we're being too hard on this show.
Pass our own judgment on it because, and again, maybe that Honeymooner show was just a bad one. But it was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. Especially once I clued into the idea that it really was about Ralph and Ed, you know. It's like, it's, again, Fred and Barney. I just don't give an F about that. But yeah, Leave It to Beaver, as I started looking into it, because it's like I feel like I know what this show is, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen it. So I just assumed, like, Leave It to Beaver, this is going to be boring. And I'm looking through the wiki page, and I'm like, what is there even to say about this? But the more I read about it, the more intrigued I became. Like, this sounds good. So that's the weird thing, is that we have shows that sound good and are bad, and shows that sound bad and are good. So who knows what's going to happen here? But the more I read about this show, I'm like, it seems like the people who made this show, they seemed pretty on the ball. So I'll explain to you what I learned, I guess, and we'll see how it actually turns out. So Leave It to Beaver ran for 6 seasons from 1957 to 1963. It was never all that popular. It was on ABC for 1 year and just wasn't doing that well, so CBS picked it up for the rest. It never broke into the top 30. It never won any awards, but nowadays it's obviously considered one of the greatest shows of all time. But what it did do, all this stuff that was neat and weird, it was the first show told from the child's point of view. You know, it wasn't, the parents were there, but it wasn't about the parents, where usually if there's kids on these shows, the kids are just, you know, side characters or whatever. One little neat thing that I'm glad I researched a little before we watched is I found the first episode, but we're actually going to watch the second episode because the first episode is not the first episode. They had to swap them, because the intended first episode showed a toilet tank, and it was the first TV show to ever show a toilet, and it took them an extra week to convince the censors that it was okay that they yeah. And apparently like the bathroom shows up a lot in this show, but just in ways of, like, you know, Beaver will go lock himself in the bathroom because he's upset with his parents, and they're like, you come out of there. But yeah, like the way Psycho was the first movie to show a toilet, this was the first show to show a toilet, and it's just like, you just couldn't, it's a toilet. And it sounds so dumb on the face of it, but I guess I can see where the issue is, because specifically like Married with Children, you know, it's like like when you think of these like
Yeah, it was full of bathroom jokes.
yeah, like lowbrow. As it's like, so it's like they're like, if we let them show a toilet on TV, how long until there's a joke about pooping, and how long until the fabric of American society unravels forever, you know? But they just couldn't justify it. They're like, it's just a toilet.
Now, just on a personal note, I watched Leave It to Beaver when I was a child, and I liked Leave It to Beaver. I found Mom and Dad didn't seem realistic, but I would have liked to have had his mother and father for parents.
Yeah.
And when I was about 7, I think it was, I had to go and get new shoes over at Savage's shoe store. Special fit. My mother we didn't have a whole lot of money. We had lots of kids, but she always put money into the footgear. But I got a big glossy, I don't know what it was, 8x10 photo of Beaver and his brother, and I think Mom and Dad are in it too. Nice big glossy photo of them for getting shoes at Savage's shoe store. So there.
It seems kind of random. They weren't like special Leave It to Beaver.
No, they weren't Beaver shoes. No, they were Oxford shoes.
I guess though they did just kind of give away random stuff more, I feel like, in the past. Like I remember in a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, I got a cassette single of Terrence Trent D'Arby. His song was Wishing Well. No one remembers that shit anymore, but I just had it. I didn't like it. It wasn't very good, but I listened to it sometimes because, I don't know, I got it in the cereal.
But I carried that Beaver picture around with me for quite a few years, and I don't know where it is now, but maybe somebody still got it in our family.
So this show, it was pretty expensive for the time, mostly because it had a lot of outdoor scenes. And the creators of it, Bob Mosher and Joe Connolly, they spent time as head writers for Amos and Andy on radio, so that's interesting. They weren't the only head writers, but for a while they were. And between them, they had 8 kids. One of them had 2 kids, one of them had 6 kids. So they would like take notes of what their kids were doing and saying and the kind of conversations they were having and like work it into the show. And they told all the writers not to invent situations for the show. Like try to just look into your own past and try to remember what it was like to be a kid. Don't just make up some dumb shit where, you know, as opposed to last week, like they just making up dumb sitcom shit, you know, like I was like, these people sound like they had a good idea and a good like writerly sense of what is good as opposed to what sucks. So, I mean, we'll see how it turns out, but I was pretty impressed by that. And it makes me think of this show called Freaks and Geeks that only ran for 1 season in 1999. It wasn't popular and it got canceled, but everyone in it is famous now. Seth Rogen was in it, just everyone. You would recognize everyone from the show, but at the time it was not popular. But they did the same thing. Like they tried really hard to make it what it was really like to be in high school. Like before they wrote the season, they sat down all the writers and were like, just tell me what high school was like for you. And millions of episodes of all the trauma and horrible things that happened. So it's interesting that decades before, Leave It to Beaver had that same philosophy of like, don't just make up shit. Everyone can feel it when you make up shit. Like go find the real thing that happened to you. And in like Leave It to Beaver's case, just dumb shit like, you know, you got to wear a hat during the school recital because the kid tried to give himself a haircut or whatever. You know, like one of the writer's kids did that, so they made it into an episode, stuff like that. And this especially intrigued me. There's this, it's become kind of cliche now, but this piece of writing advice people always say, they say like, kill your darlings. Like if you've got this one thing in your script that you just love so much, take it out and see if the story still works, because you might be warping things around your one big idea that probably isn't that good anyway. So these guys had a similar type of idea, and this is just a bold thing to do, is supposedly one of the writers said later when he was being interviewed, when they would do table reads and run through stuff, if one of the lines someone wrote got a great big laugh, they would take it out. Because they just want it to be kind of more like that Wonder Years feeling. They want it to have a general nice feeling, but if you have some great big joke, that doesn't feel real anymore. It doesn't feel like a real situation. It feels like a great big joke. So they actually took those out, and I'm like, that's some bold stuff. That's like that's counterintuitive thinking, but it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, reading about it, I'm like, I hope this doesn't suck, because philosophically this sounds great.
Let's watch it then. I'm all excited about watching it now.
So yeah, we're gonna watch again, like I said, episode 2, because it's the real, it was intended to be episode 1, but it had the dreaded toilet tank. And then if we're feeling it, the same way that I Love Lucy had the pilot episode, that's the good thing about these really famous shows, is there's stuff like that available. So I also have a pilot episode of Leave It To Beaver where all the actors are different. So if we're interested, we could check that out, just to see what Leave It To Beaver is like without the Beave, without Wally and the Beave.
I think we should check out both of them.
Yeah. Oh, and that was one of the original titles they pitched, was Wally and the Beaver. But one of the early sponsors was like, can we change that name? Because people are going to think that's a nature show. Which it is a weird name. I don't know why they call this kid the Beaver.
Children and adults look at the world through different eyes. When you're young, a policeman stands 10 feet tall.
Oh, hold on just a sec. Let me just pause this for a sec, because stuff that I'm remembering I read, but I just didn't write in my notes. How these two kids got cast is interesting. So the kid who plays the Beaver, he had to come back like 3 or 4 times for different auditions, but he showed up one time with his little Cub Scout uniform on, and he was just like anxious to go. He's like, can we hurry up, because I want to go to my Cub Scout meeting. And that's what like won them over, is like he really is just Americana 1950s kid, not putting on airs or anything. And it's doubly so with his brother. His brother never intended to be an actor, was only there because his friend was auditioning. And it's like, you hear that story sometimes of just like the guy who never intended to even be in the show. He was, I guess, like he just kind of stood out. He was always like combing his hair and preening himself a lot. And they were just like, who's that kid? And yeah, they ended up hiring him. So it's just interesting. That's how they got hired.
And the first time you fall in love is not always with a girl. And that's our story tonight on Leave It To Beaver.
The father's so calm. Most fathers go, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, it is definitely interesting to see. I mean, this is less of a change than I Love Lucy. But yeah, these pilot episodes, it's like a good idea, because you can tell that they don't quite have it yet. You know, it's like that first attempt, and then they switch things up. So yeah, I'd say the main Leave It To Beaver was pretty good. The pilot, not as good. I guess we'll talk about that after. But yeah, like Leave It To Beaver is definitely I mean, it's a lightweight show, obviously, but yeah, it wasn't bad. It was pretty well done.
The kids were good. The kids in both shows were very good, not contrived at all. Mom and Dad in the pilot I didn't find as contrived as in the actual show.
Right.
They were a little bit too perfect.
Yeah, like all that stuff I was reading about the kids, and yeah, it's like you can tell they really did try to make everyone behave realistically and make the situations real. But yeah, then when it cuts to the parents, so the basic episode was the kids order a fucking alligator through the mail, and it shows up, and they are like feeding it with an eyedropper and like raising this alligator. Like, so even though that sounds kind of like a crazy situation or whatever, yeah, it was surprisingly believable feeling. And they're showing this alligator to the kids in the neighborhood, charging them a nickel and whatever, or a dime. Then when it would cut to the parents, yeah, just like discussing like, where's our, I'm missing an egg. Oh, I'm missing some brandy. And yeah, all that felt remarkably fake.
Yeah.
Like, just really weird.
Their whole, their dress, their demeanor, they never got really angry about anything, which you would. I mean, initially you might just think, okay, well, maybe that missing brandy, maybe I'm just imagining it, or the missing egg. But after you've missed like half a dozen eggs and your bottle of brandy is now down to half, you'd start getting a little pissed off, but they never got pissed off.
Yeah, or they didn't even bring it up, really. Like, you'd at least ask the kids. Like, they just presume, like, oh, it couldn't be the kids. Who else is in your house? Like, of course it's the kids, you know?
Well, then they discovered, though, it was the new homemaker. They blamed her.
Maid, I guess?
Washerwoman, the maid.
But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, that is weird that they put so much effort into making the kid side feel real and zero. If anything, it's like they deliberately, I guess, like, maybe one thing is, like, I remember reading about Shawshank. One of the theories about it is the prison guards in Shawshank are such assholes. Like, they're just incredibly mean. And one of the theories is that maybe that's not really how they were. It's that this is like this kind of big operatic telling of the story through the filter of the prisoners. Like, this is the prisoners remembering what it was like to be in prison. So in their view, these turnkeys are just the worst. So maybe that's kind of the idea, is like, this is how the kids envision the parents. I mean, maybe, if you wanted to be generous.
I don't know.
Because the only other way to look at it is that the parents are really underwritten and badly developed, where the kids are really well written and really well developed. It's just strange. It's strange that it would be so unbalanced. But yeah, because I even think that idea that we kind of went into this with, that, you know, whenever you think of squeaky clean 50s TV, you think of Leave It to Beaver. But the kids are getting into weird stuff, and they refuse to change their clothes, and like, they're actual kids. It's those parents.
Yeah, it's mom and dad, though, are squeaky clean.
Yeah, and they're always wearing their Sunday best, but like I said, like, not just on Sunday, every day.
Every day. I mean, there's no, as I mentioned, there's no way a person could go around doing their housework all day in those heels that she had on.
Yeah.
Ooh, and she had pearls on, too.
Yeah, like even now when you go into anything that references the 50s, Fallout, video games or whatever, like, that's what you envision, is these like the pointy bras, for whatever reason, that was the style, and the high heels.
The well-pressed clothes, the well-coiffed hair.
Pearl necklace all the time.
Yeah, I mean, even Dad's pajamas weren't rumpled
like
or
silk.
wrinkled. They looked like they had just come off the ironing board.
Yeah, so it's surprising that, the kid side of it felt pretty legit, pretty realistic.
Very natural. But the grown-up part...
Yeah, so, strange. Like, I'd say it's definitely not a bad show, but like... and I guess the part at the end when the dad has to give the little moral of, like, kids, I'm proud of you that you raised an alligator and that it didn't die, but, we got to get rid of it because you can't have an alligator. I mean, that part was kind of schmaltzy, but it felt appropriate, It's like, that dad is kind of in a tough situation of, like, the kids didn't necessarily do anything wrong. It is impressive that they raised an alligator in their bathroom, but you got to get rid of the alligator. So, I mean, it's like, all right, I'll give him a pass.
And maybe as a kid, watching it as a kid, like I said to you earlier, that I would have liked to have them for parents.
Yeah, I'm sure, because you had...
So maybe that's how how it was set up, this idea that these parents were beyond reproach. And every kid who's watching that show would want to have those people as parents, because they always looked good and they sounded good and they never ever really got mad.
Right, pretty reasonable. Yeah, because I got to assume in your household with like the 12 kids, like, there's no time to get down on a knee and have a calm conversation about the morals of the day. It's just like, shut up, kids. Yeah, so I guess that's the only part. That's the only thing about it that I would have changed, or that feels a little weird, is like the kid part of it is really good. And even when the parents have to deal with the kids, I'm like, okay, I can get on board with that. It's just weird that when it's just the parents talking to each other, they're so stilted. They're never like, what the hell's going on in this house? Where's all my eggs and brandy? It's just weird that if anything...
And they don't even accuse each other.
Yeah.
Like, she should be saying to him, hey, how many eggs did you take this? Wasn't it enough that I gave you 2 eggs for breakfast? And he's saying to her, what have you been doing today? Nipping into the brandy?
Yeah.
See, there's never anything like that. They're just so in sync, those two.
So that is, that's weird. That's a strange call. I'm not sure why the parents are so soft and so just that blurry lens of nostalgia and stuff or whatever. Yeah.
They're perfect people.
But I'm impressed with the kid side of it, because they're just...
Yeah, the kids are very, very natural.
So then in the pilot, it's half of the cast is the same. It's the same mom, who I said too, I recognized her right away, but I didn't know from where, and it's because she's in Airplane. She's the lady on the airplane that can speak jive, and I just think like, oh yeah, that's her. And the beaver was the same, but it had a different dad and a different brother, but basically the same. But it was definitely that thing that I had read about how they didn't want people to contrive situations. They wanted to, think back to your actual life. The pilot, obviously, they didn't have that mandate yet, because it's very silly. It's just that Wally and the Beave heard on the playground, basically, that if you save 1,000 milk caps from the top of milk bottles, you get a bicycle
from the milk company.
So, and it's pretty funny of them stealing everyone's milk caps and stuff
right off the doorstep.
But then they show up to the milk company with the bottle caps, and that's where it becomes sitcom-y and silly, is that the people at the milk company are like, what is this contest? Oh man, I'm not ready. And they're, calling up the chain, calling their superiors.
That's kind of not bad, though, really, when you think about it, because that's what they do in big business.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to take responsibility for anything, so they just keep passing the buck, passing the buck, passing the buck. So they pass the buck so many times that the bicycle, they almost believed they had a contest, and they bought a bicycle.
Yeah, like I actually do think it's a pretty funny bit. Like if it was in a sketch show, it's a pretty funny sketch. It's just not a believable scenario. Like it is a sitcom thing. It's just made up or whatever. But yeah, and then very similar of just like, instead of boys, you can't have the alligator. Now it's like, boys, you didn't really earn that bike and you got to give it back and whatever. But
when you hear the real story about why they believed there was a contest anyway, that's really believable.
Oh yeah,
here are these two older punky type boys who have bicycles themselves, and Beaver's hanging around, and they're annoyed with him. They want him to go away, so they tell him about this contest, and so he goes home, tells his brother about it, start saving the caps because he wants a bike.
Isn't that weird too? Yeah, it's so weird that the parents talk so stilted and so fake and phony in both iterations. Because, yeah, the kids are the opposite, where the kid is like, yeah, that Beaver Cleaver, that kid's a creep. I'd made up some stuff and he just believed me. What is he stupid? Like, yeah, it's surprising how realistic that was. All the kids, very natural. Even the kids that are watching in the alligator show, who they come and they're paying their nickel or their dime or whatever to see it, and and when Beaver starts telling him that this thing is soft, the kids and you see this one little girl and she just kind of flinches. And Man, I remember just as far as stuff like that, which is, I guess this is a good sign that they did do a good job with the kids, because it makes me think of real things that happened to me, where there's always like kids making up stuff. Like in this case, it would have been like, hey, we got an alligator at home. And you'd be like, no, you don't. And then you go there and they really do. Whenever kids on the playground would just make up shit, I never bothered calling them on it, because I'm like, whatever. If you want to make up shit and pretend that I believe it, like, whatever. I don't care, kid. Tell me whatever you want. But where I finally had enough is this kid, Jerry, I knew, told me he had a Nintendo game that had 100 games on the one cartridge. And I was like, I've finally had enough. This kid's always making up fake shit. You do not have a Nintendo game with 100 games in it. That's fucking nonsense. You stop lying about this shit. So he's like, well, all right then, I'll show you. And I was like, okay, I didn't expect that. He's calling my bluff. So I went to this kid's house for the first time ever. He lived up by where Dan used to live, up by McPherson. And what it was like this Chinese bootleg Nintendo game, because we got the Nintendo in like late 1985, early 1986, but it actually came out in Japan in 1983. And those 1983 games were very crappy and very small. They're more like an Atari game. So you actually could fit 100 really early Nintendo games on one cartridge. And it was a real thing. And I was like, Jerry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I doubted your 100 games, because here it is. But I would have bet $1 zillion that kid was lying about that.
This just came to me now. There's something that these kids reminded me of, and how natural they acted. There was, it'd be earlier than that, the Happy Gang that were in movies.
Oh yeah, like Alfalfa.
Alfalfa and the little fat guy and
the Little Rascals.
Yeah,
is that what they were called?
Yeah, and you know what? Those kids in this act very like that, very natural, and always kind of getting caught up in little pranks that they weren't necessarily the creators of them, but they were always caught up in them. This is very much like that. The kids were excellent in this.
Yeah, and it's nice too, because they're kind of getting into weird stuff and doing weird crap, but it's not obnoxious. It's not like Dennis the Menace with his because that never struck me as realistic either. This kid who's always bothering Mr. Wilson and shooting out windows with his slingshot and stuff. Like, most kids aren't that much of a problem unless they have actual emotional problems.
Now, in fairness to Dennis the Menace, maybe we ought to at some time watch a TV version of Dennis the Menace, because this was surprisingly.
That's a good point. Like, I am misremembering the Beaver. Maybe I'm also misremembering Dennis the Menace.
Yeah.
So yeah, that basically, the kid stuff, 10 thumbs up. But yeah, the parents, Ward and June, relax a little bit, you automatons. You're weirdos. You don't feel real at all. So yeah, I don't know, the prevailing, maybe that's the thing. It's just that these shows are getting to the point that they're so old that no one actually remembers what they were really like anymore.
And people have this concept that is not true, because you're not watching it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, as my vision, Ward and June, yeah, they were exactly like I thought they would be. But the kids themselves, the action, no, I got to say, they were well done, and the situations were well done. The little antics that were happening were very believable. Some kid get buy right into that.
Yeah.
And his brother buy right into it, too. Now, the thing that I find is odd, my God, why wouldn't those parents buy those children a bicycle
Yeah.
at some point in time? You
Yeah,
know?
I can see the pet thing in the actual pilot where it's like, like we're not ready to have an animal yet. But in the pre-pilot,
you're not responsible for your room, and you're not responsible for this, so no, you can't have a pet. But a bicycle?
yeah,
Especially that older boy. Come on, he's about 12 or 13 years old.
yeah, they had. I don't know. The philosophy of the parents was like even weirder in that pre-show. It was called "It's a Small World" too. It wasn't called "Leave It To Beaver." Yeah, because they not only, for whatever reason, the dad wouldn't buy them a bicycle, but then he also had this lofty philosophy of like, we shouldn't interrupt the world of children, for it is their own world, and we cannot. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, get out of here, recast him, stop it.